It's good to see all of you this morning. Pirkei Avot, the section of the Mishnah that deals with ethics and philosophy in some ways, chapter 3, verse 15 reads as follows. Hakol tzafui v'harashut nituna, which there's a lot of different ways to translate it. One of the ways we can translate it, I think the best is, everything is foreseen, yet freedom of choice is granted. Right? Everything is foreseen, yet freedom of choice is granted. And it really comes down to a major philosophical conundrum that a lot of the monotheistic religions have, Judaism included, which is if you have an almighty, all-knowing, all-powerful God, how does that justify, how does that come together with the idea that we have free will and we have a freedom to choose? And our tradition deals with it by putting it right out in the open and saying, yes, everything is foreseen and we still have choice. And I would argue that, at least from the choice side of things, there's no more clear and direct message of that in our Torah than the beginning of this week's Parsha, right? We look at the beginning of Parasha Re'eh, which you can find on 1061 in the red Eitz Chaim Chumashim that are in front of you. And it says, Re'eh, Anochi noten lifnehem hayom bracha uchlala. See, I set this day before you a blessing and a curse. Blessing if you obey the commandments of the Lord your God that I enjoin you upon this day, and a curse if you do not obey the commandments of the Lord your God, but turn away from the path that I have set you and follow other gods. So the question for us then is, if God knows everything, if God foresees everything, if God is all-knowing and all-powerful and can do anything God wants, how is it that we still have this choice? More so, how is it that God is telling us that we should exercise this choice? And the rabbis over the centuries have really struggled with this idea of trying to find a combination or some sort of a harmonization between these two ideas. So, from your perspective, how do we both have a God that is all-knowing, all-powerful, foresees everything, and choice? What do you think? How does that work for you in your life? Sophia? Okay, so Sophia says it's a challenge, and for you, Sophia, it's the idea of control, that if you have some control of your choices, right? If you have that control, it can be soothing, we can have that sense. Is it a perception of control, Sophia, or is it actual control, do you think? Right, that is a question, right? How much control do we have? Do we have the ability to make choices? I mean, one way of thinking about this is thinking about, I remember when our kids were young and we were thinking about parenting and stuff like that, and somebody once told us, always give your kids a choice, but make sure that whatever the choice is, you're okay with both of them. Okay, well, is that control or is that not control? Do the kids have a choice? Yes. But do they have a choice to do anything that they want? No. So maybe that's a way to deal with it, right? That's one possibility. Bernie?
Always have a choice to do the wrong thing or the thing you don't like, but there's a consequence.
Okay, so they always have a choice. By the way, they don't always have a choice, right? Sometimes, especially when the kids are young, like as teenagers, it's a little bit different, right? But you don't. If a child who's an infant or a child who's a toddler is doing something that you don't like or in a place you don't like, you can pick them up and you can move them. So yes, they do have a choice, but we can exert our control to some degree. We can send them to their room. We can do all sorts of different things. There may be consequences, and I think that's what you always have a choice, but there may be consequences to those choices, and you have to be willing to accept whatever those consequences are. Alyssa.
It makes me think of the idea of parallel universes.
Okay.
The idea that everything that could happen possibly does, and that God can see all of that, but we only can see the one that we're living in.
I love it. Spoken like a true Marvel fan, right? With this idea of parallel universes, the multiverse theory, that anything that could possibly happen does, and God can see all of them. But we only see one because we see the one that we're in, and therefore there are an infinite number of choices, and depending on which way we go, God can see where that is. I like that, Diana.
I'm thinking there aren't always consequences, even though you have a choice. And what comes to mind is are more of like the hukim, like kashrut or shatnez. Like if somebody mixes wool and linen, the world isn't going to crumble, their suit isn't going to spontaneously combust.
Right.
But they've made a choice. I'm not going to follow this. If they've made a choice with kashrut, I'm going to go and eat non-kosher food. I mean, are they going to end up with food poisoning and go into the hospital?
Well, but
Probably not.
consequences
So,
can be a lot of different
but there
things.
are a lot of different, it depends what those consequences are to those. To me, I'm kind of looking at almost like the cost benefit analysis of it. Like when I choose to keep the mitzvot, the one, um, the benefit for me is that I feel like I'm part of a community. Um, if somebody's here, for example, to say Kaddish, I'm not today, but I'm enabling others to fulfill that mitzvah. So it's all tied together in the way that we choose. People are here today because they made a choice to come here today.
Thank you all.
Thank you. And if God chose it to come here today, what's the consequence? I don't know. So
Right. Well, and look, but consequences, right, there can be direct consequences and indirect consequences. And I think that's a little bit what you're talking about, right? If somebody chooses to not observe the mitzvot of Judaism, not connect in with community, there may not be a direct consequence the way we read about in the Torah, right, when people don't do what God wants them to do. But there may be other consequences of being isolated, of not having that sense of connection and community that participating in those things gives you. So there are direct and indirect consequences as we go. Judy, and then, yeah.
I wonder if we're looking at this wrong, because it's addressed to you, plural. It's addressed to the Jewish community.
Yes and no, actually. You picked on something very interesting, right? It's actually, if you look at the words, it is grammatically incorrect because re'eh is singular. And noten lifnechem, it's clearly plural. And the rabbis pick up on that and actually say, well, who is God speaking to? Is God speaking to a person, each of us individually? Is God speaking to all of us at the community, as a community? And the rabbis answer, yes. Right? That it's intentional because there's a message for both individuals and for a community in this. And so both of them are there. But it's a very good pickup on that. March.
And sometimes when you're giving information to children or in other situations and to somebody and to help them with a choice, and you just know they're going to do the thing that's going to be problematic, and there's no way, they just have to go through it to do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if that's part of this process is, God is all-knowing, so then he knows, maybe he knows it, or she knows that there's this movement that has to happen as a community, and these are community decisions and individual decisions.
Right. So what Marge is saying is that knowledge and the freedom to choose aren't necessarily exclusive, right? That sometimes we as parents know We sort of know the choice that our child is going to make, and we know where it's going to lead them, and we sort of let them do it anyway because there's a learning piece to that. The example that I give, there are a number of people that are here in my Basic Judaism class, and I've mentioned this before, and usually without her in the room, but now she is in the room, so I'll mention it, which is, I know my wife very well. She knows me very, very well, right? I know pretty well what her response is going to be if I go to sleep and don't do the dishes before I go up to bed. Now, yes. Now, does that mean that just because I know that, does that mean I'm controlling her decision? No. She still has the choice to make whatever decisions she's going to make, and sometimes she surprises me and doesn't say anything or whatever, right? But knowing about it doesn't mean you control it. Now, if you extrapolate that and you say, well, God knows us infinitely well, philosophically, right? Then God will be able to predict with infinite accuracy what our reaction and what our choices are going to be. It doesn't mean that God is controlling those choices. It just means that God knows. So that's one way of sort of responding to this and saying that knowledge, right, foresight, and what it doesn't say here, which is interesting, right? What it doesn't say here is that everything is predetermined. There is, within Judaism, right, there are certain philosophical trends that talk about predeterminism, right? That things are meant to happen, that things happen in a certain way that we really do struggle with. But that's not what this section of Pirkei Avot is saying. It just says it's seen, it's known. It doesn't mean that it's predetermined. And that's one other way of dealing with this, right? We have the choice to make. And there are consequences to it, and God says it clearly. If you choose wisely, right, it's a bracha, it's a blessing. If you choose poorly, it's a klala, it's a curse. But the choice is still ours. So the question is, what do we do with that, right? How do we know when we're choosing wisely? How do we know when we're not? Well, part of that is looking at this book that we're reading right now, right? We go back to these values, to these ideas, and we use those as guidance. And if we think about it, right, this is almost the end of the Torah. There are about 4, 5 more parshiot left in the entire Torah. And we are at the point where Moses realizes he's not going to be with everybody in the land of Israel, and he's trying to set the stage for success, right? It's really, for those of us who have kids who have transitioned away, we were just talking about this, Diana and I, right? For those who have kids that have transitioned away and gone to college and gone away and started to think about building their own lives, that's really this point. So what do we as parents say? What do we as parents do? Right? If we're there and we're following them off to college and making sure that, they follow them to their classes and make sure that's not what we want to do, right? We have to allow them to make their choices. But we also have to understand and give them the sense that they have a place that they can draw on to learn what to do, so that they're not making the choice in a vacuum. And Diana, I love the way that you described it when we were speaking outside earlier, right? We have to give them both roots and wings, right? Both roots and wings. And if it's all wings and no roots, it's a problem, right? It's great. They go and they're creative, but they have no way, when they're out there, the winds, right, will come and will take them every which way. And if they have all roots and no wings, then they're stuck. They don't get to go anywhere. And so this image, it's a beautiful image, right, of this combination between roots and wings. And I think that's what Moses is trying to do here, right? He's saying you're going and you're going to have you're going to have these wings. I'm giving you these wings. But here are your roots. Here are the things that when time gets difficult, when hard choices have to be made, you're not alone. Here are the values. Here are the things. And there are going to be consequences to those choices that you make, because we all know that. There are always consequences to the choices that we make. This is a powerful, powerful section, and it's very often framed in terms of just the storyline, right? And there's actually a great ceremony that's going to happen a little bit later on where they're standing in the land of Israel, and there's half of the people are on one side and half of the people on the other side, reading off all these blessings and curses. This is sort of the prediction of what's going to happen. But that moment is meant to say, there are consequences, but here are the values that can guide you in between these choices. And if we look through at Re'eh, it talks about some of the basic values that we have: where we worship, how we worship, right? How to be part of a community. Some of the values of, don't partake in blood. Well, why is that here? This idea of cruelty, this idea of understanding what matters in life. All of these things over the next few parshiot are going to help us as we move into the land, make sure that we have some roots and not just the wings. Any comments on this before I close? So, Rabbi Sachs, in his book on life-changing ideas, at the end of his chapter, he likes to summarize it in a sentence or two. And I'll leave you with his summary, right? He writes, "We are not defined by what happens to us. There is always a choice. And by exercising the strength to choose, we can rise above fate. The world happens. There are lots of things over which we have no say, over which we have no choice. But we always have a choice in the way that we respond. We always have a choice in the way that we're going to think about it, react to it. Sometimes the chemicals in our minds and the chemicals in our bodies take us down different directions, but we have the choice on how we're going to manage that, how we're going to deal with that, whether we're going to take it seriously or ignore it. All of those things are within our hands. All of those things are within our choice. And all of those things lead to the blessings and to the curses that we have within our life. So this week, as we're starting, we're going to hear a little bit later on the blessing announcing the month of Elul, right? As we are almost a month away, Rabbi Aaron, from Rosh Hashanah, from Yom Kippur, from the time of year that we think about our choices and we think about how we're going to make choices for next year. May this month of Elul bring us the wisdom to choose wisely, to see the blessings that are in our life, and to choose those blessings and celebrate them. Shabbat Shalom.